welcome to the fourth and final game of the evening. A game called Röki. Like, that's probably not the actual pronunciation, but I don't speak Swedish.
It's one of those vowels that we don't have in English.
Yeah, my tongue does not do umlauts. So, Röki it is. Anyway, so Röki is a adventure game inspired by Scandinavian folklore, a dark contemporary fairy tale underpinned by a touching narrative, an alluring art style, ancient puzzles, and atmospheric exploration. Join Tove on a fantastical journey to save her family, one that takes her deep into a hidden, long-forgotten world of folklore, filled with strange locations and even stranger creatures. Explore the ancient wilderness, solve its mysteries, and save your family in this modern adventure game for all. Yeah, folklore is a good keyword for this game because it's really heavy on Scandinavian folklore.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of actual creatures and tales from Scandinavian folklore will appear in this game. You're probably going to be familiar with trolls, like trolls in the classical sense, gigantic rock creatures who will turn to actual stone in the sunlight.
Yeah, they're vaguely rockish, but when they get hit by direct sunlight, they just completely die and turn to stone, basically.
Yes. And that is a factor. That's one of the various subplots going on in this game. You know, you've got the tomate, which are basically gnomes. And
the Swedish tomte is more or less where the lawn gnome look came. I mean, it's the same thing. It has other names, but they're the ones that have they're really short with the beards and the pointed red hats usually.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, and there are, I guess, for lack of better term, various, let's say, boss encounters with some creatures from the mythology, like the Hoken, if I'm remembering that correctly, squid creature.
Yeah, like, sounds about right.
Yeah,
this is an adventure game, so I imagine it doesn't have much in the way of actual combat.
No, it's you have to. The boss interludes, as I'd like to call them, are you got to figure out a puzzle to get out of a place.
Which is very fitting for the folklore of, Scandinavian folklore, some even Russian stuff too, where you don't fight the supernatural thing. You try to figure out a way to not piss it off.
Not all the time.
Get it to help you or whatever.
Like the boss interlude with the fucking spider, that played out by dealing with sunlight angles.
Mm-hmm.
Like, forget what her name was, but yeah, and this is an adventure game in the true sense of the word. This isn't a walking simulator kind of deal with very nominal game mechanics. No, you are finding items, you are solving puzzles, not just your typical item key lock puzzles either. There are some environmental puzzles as well, like aligning wolf statues to match against wolf statues in the background, to cite one example. So it's got a variety of puzzles. Also, this is a full 3D adventure game, which is not a style you see all that often. And what that means is you have full 360-degree range of motion. So bust out your controller for this.
Looks like fixed camera, though.
Sometimes. Depends on the area.
Or like semi-fixed, like you don't have full camera control in most places.
You don't have, like, the camera is fixed. It's just it will move along in certain areas. But I actually would not recommend point and click for 3D adventure games. They've never felt right to me.
Yeah, it's harder to point and click on things when they might be like behind something, or it works better on a flat surface.
Yeah. So, I found it worked perfectly well with an Xbox 360 controller or an Xbox One controller. And it's also a very modern adventure game in the sense that it shows you all the waypoints, so you don't have to pixel hunt. Um, Although once again, if you're using a controller, Tove will lock on to certain a certain object if she's looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Now, in terms of the logic behind the puzzles, um, very solid, very understandable. Like there wasn't really a case of you know, I got stumbled by because I didn't know which thing went with the thing. Which is always a good thing because that is a common complaint with an adventure game. Um, it's also worth noting that not every item key lock puzzle is purely that. Another example of that would be one of the cathedral puzzles, which you have items, but you've got to figure out what order to put them in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a really good game. Honestly, one of the best I've played this year. Um, uh, in no short terms. Like I know this was a really good game because I was disappointed that I had to stop playing it. It's a longer adventure game than you might think for an indie title. Um, I'd say your first playthrough would probably clock in at 10 to 12 hours. Like,
is there significant replay value aside from experiencing the story multiple times?
There is a collectible. Uh, Tove will find various objects, bug larvae, a piece of clothing, a flower, all sorts of things that will go into her scrapbook. They're very tiny things. They're very missable. I'm not sure if anything's permanently missable. I'm assuming with game design this modern that nothing's permanently missable. And in terms of the overall structure, outside of the first chapter, which is a lot of story, setting up things, getting acquainted with the mechanics, then you get into the forest proper, and there's a lot of, at least at first, seemingly a lot of puzzles to deal with. But as it turns out, there's actually a certain order to it. That is to say, you might need an item for a certain puzzle, but it turns out you won't get that until much later in a completely different area. And you can't solve that puzzle until you get to that other point. So it's all pretty spread out. As far as the story itself, it's like I can't really speak on the folklore aspect of it because I'll be honest, I'm not that versed in Scandinavian folklore. But it seemed a thoughtful usage of such things. Now,
I mean the saving your missing sibling or other family member from getting into supernatural trouble of some sort or another is a recurring theme. So
right. So to go in a bit deeper on what's going on here, Tove needs to save her kid brother Lars from the titular Röki. Like the Röki is this shadow cat creature thing that has been kidnapping children in order to for its mother to transform it into a human child so that it can be accepted within the human populace. Because it turns humanity at large has problem with large cat creatures.
Go figure.
Yes.
In the historical myths or in historical folklore, often this will also be like something about like sneaking into heaven or something, like after you die, if you're accepted as human or something. I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, that is actually present in the game, although it's got its own spin, as Tove needs to breach that haven by waking up the four guardians of the forest. Like it's what, bear, wolf, hawk, and snake, if I'm remembering correctly. Like I could be off on one of those animals, but you know, you've got to wake them up, and once you do that, you're gonna go to the final confrontation. Although the way the story was playing out, it's probably going to be less a it's like I can't really speak on more as I'd be giving the actual story away. And playing for the story here is definitely a reason. I'd say the reason to play this game. As an adventure game, it's pretty solid. Once again, not amazing in terms of its actual mechanics. Not frustrating, which is good, but it's like I wouldn't rank it up there with the all-time great LucasArts adventure games, for example. At least in terms of how it plays out as an adventure game. But its story is really, really good. And that's really what made this. Now, it's like I'll grant that there are people who hate playing games for the story. Although an adventure game, it definitely can get away with that, because like with an adventure game, it's either going to be narrative driven or character driven. This is kind of both.
Yeah, the point is it's not really super. They're not usually super gameplay driven.
Right. But it is more gameplay driven than, say, Dear Esther, or What Remains of Edith Finch.
Yeah, it's not just a walking story thing.
As far as its its touted art style, it's solid, but I think they overhype it a bit. Like, it looks good, but for lack of a better term, this looks like a very typical indie title.
I think they did a good job of making it, at least in the stills, it looks very like you could see this in a storybook or something.
Yeah, like it's not a bad art style, and they translate it to 3D really well. Like everything here is 3D. So, it's just, I can't give it all that much praise in terms of its actual like visual identity, because I'm like, this looks like a whole bunch of other indie games I've seen or we featured, or there's nothing wrong with that. And this this is also going to come up next week. Although I think next week's game actually did the art style a bit better. But anyway, but Röki looks pretty good, especially for its budget. You're not gonna confuse this for a AAA game or anything. Like its animations are pretty on some of the monsters are pretty stiff compared to what you would get on a higher budget range, for example. But for its level, it's some solid stuff. Ditto the music. The music's appropriately dour, otherworldly stuff. There is a soundtrack option, although I honestly wouldn't really recommend the soundtrack outside of the game. And that does get to pricing. This will clock in at $20. $20 is what I would recommend for a game of this production value, of this length, and so on and so forth. The soundtrack clocks in at $8.99, $9. No bundle option, which is odd. Yeah, it's like I'm looking right here and I'm not seeing it. So, but once again, not really going to recommend the soundtrack as a separate purchase. I'd say wait for a bundle option if that comes along. And once again, as far as the game goes, this was really good. I'd say an 8 to 9 out of 10. I could see this in my top 10 of the year. Maybe not top 5, but certainly top 10. Like, yeah. So very high recommendation here. And yeah, that'll about do it for our review session this week. So the week ahead, coming up on Wednesday, August 5th, we will be having back on the program Laurent McCure of Chain Awesome Games. We'll be talking about Night Squad 2. If you recall, we had them on the program, not too long ago, like I think last year, maybe a year and a half, for the game After Charge. But we'll be talking about the sequel to the game that made them, Night Squad. And we do have a Friday program this week, barring any last-minute delays. I will admit that has happened twice this season. But believe me, it is no fun waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, the day of the show, and seeing a letter in your inbox saying, "Oh, sorry, something came up. Can't do the show. Bye." It's not even a rescheduling. It's just, sorry we wasted your time. Indeed. Anyway, we'll be having Niels Wittenberg, or probably Wittenberg, of Invisible Walls. And we'll be talking about a game called First Class Trouble, which is an asymmetrical third-person multiplayer cooperative game about trust and deceit. Honestly, from what I've seen, this game reminds me a lot of The Ship, if anyone else remembers that. Anyway, we'll be talking more about this on Friday. So, until Wednesday, I shall wish you good gaming.